ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. I'm joined by two guests I'll introduce in a minute, but plenty to discuss as ever. Our main theme, as you'll have seen from the title, is Scotland a Christian nation? So we're going to be talking about what that could mean and the implications of that, but we'll come to that in a minute. But let's introduce our guests. So first of all, this evening, we have Phil Holden, our deputy leader and regular on the show. Evening, Phil.
Good evening, Richard.
Phil's background still lacking in Christmas decoration.
Yeah.
A more illuminated background we have with David Scott of Northern Exposure. Welcome, David.
Hello, Richard. It's a delight to be here again.
Yeah, it's a while since you've been on, isn't it? It's in fact, we haven't even met up for a chat, have we, for quite a while. So it's great to see you, David. I'd say we've got lots to talk about this evening. Do fire comments in. We'll try and bring those on. We can interact with those a little bit as well. Now, a few bits and bobs of news from the week before we get into the main topic. I mean, the big news in Scotland seems to be that Humza Yousaf has announced his forthcoming resignation. Well, he's standing down. He's not standing for election at the next Scottish election, which unfortunately is not until 2026. So I feel like with Humza Yousaf, I've said so much about him over the years. He's been one of the richest veins for mining content for the Scottish Family Party. So I've said lots and lots of things. So, yeah, how are you feeling about this, David? What's your take on Humza Yousaf?
Well, I think he's had a better offer. I think he's looked at the world of Scottish politics, where he's really been rumbled. He's been caught out in terms of competence. He's been caught out in terms of his racist views and his extremist views, and his essential party trick, which is to paint himself as a victim, to paint anyone who opposes him as evil by definition, and to then claim the moral high ground and then try to silence and intimidate to prevent any meaningful debate. That little set of tricks, it's got old. It's not working anymore, and because there's no substance to him, I think this is the key to understanding Humza. There's no substance to him. Humza tries on suits of clothes. If you've seen him do his swearing in at Parliament in various outfits that look like they came from it's meant to be Button's outfit at the pantomime. He turns up in various combinations of kilt and Pakistani dress. He tries on suits of clothes. He tries on Scottishness and claims to be as Scottish as they come, the ultimate definition of Scottishness. When people talk to him from Pakistan, he says, "I'm the son of the soil of Pakistan." When he's in front of an Islamic audience, he is a deeply devout follower of Islam. But equally, when he's in front of a woke Marxist audience, which has a completely different viewpoint. Yeah, well, for example, yes, he's a devout follower of Karl Marx as well. He seeks after something to define him as a human being, because I suspect there is no substance within. This is the nature of him. It makes him very dangerous, and for that reason, I'm glad he's going. I don't think Scottish politics will be poorer without him. I think it'll be somewhat safer. And there were certain aspects about his conduct. When you see him with people who are weaker and more marginal, people who do not have the power that he had, his conduct could be extremely aggressive. Two examples come to mind. His interaction with Deke Jackson, as Mr. Jackson was protesting against one of the incarnations of the Hate Crime Act, and his dealings with the nursery in Broughty Ferry in Dundee, where he was essentially trying to ruin this business, ruin the people who ran it, because he felt slighted. It's very bullying, it's very aggressive, and that brought an unpleasantness to Scottish politics that was something, well, we can live without. So for those reasons, I'm glad we are coming up to a post Humza world. Although, to be fair, it will be less funny.
Yeah. What's your take, Phil? What's your tribute to Humza Yousaf?
He became fairly irrelevant to me, after the no confidence vote and after he was taken out as first minister. I haven't seen that much about him on the public stage. I think he's been sidelined already, and I can't really see a way back in politics for him to significance. And so I think it's hard once you've had the top job to remain relevant. That normally people just kind of fade out of view, and that's what you expect to happen.
Let's hope so. David, what you're saying there, it absolutely struck a chord with my own thoughts on the thing. Remember, I did my lecture about Humza Yousaf. Oh, you were there, weren't you, David? Were you there?
I was there. Yes, I was there. Yes.
So Humza Yousaf, man, myth, and Muslim. And if I'd have made it 4 things, it would have been man, myth, Muslim, and mannequin. For exactly the reason you said, that he puts on outfits in order to play parts. So I'd watch him in the Parliament as, say, the Justice Secretary, and he would be playing the part of Justice Secretary, using the type of language that Justice Secretaries are supposed to use, but as though he didn't really understand what was going on. He didn't really have any direction or vision for it, but he was just trying to act the part. And I think he was doing that right up to being First Minister. I always want to mention as well, I'm a proud Muslim. But again, I'm quite happy to say on the record, he was having an affair with someone. At least one at one point. I mean, that's absolutely crystal clear. As far as I'm concerned, the evidence is perfectly sufficient for me to say he was having an affair. It was kept out of the media, as the SNP seem to be particularly adept at doing. So all of his talk about, being on the moral high ground, the proud Muslim. The other thing I say as well, Anas Sarwar. Are Anas Sarwar's views any different than Humza Yousaf? His political views? I would say probably not. But just Anas Sarwar hasn't got the sort of abrasive, aggressive, going after individuals, the bullying streak. He doesn't seem to have that. Now, who's more dangerous? The person who's got the wonky values, but packages them a bit more nicely, or the person who's got the wonky values and really comes across as sort of quite intimidating and aggressive and vindictive? I don't know. That's an open question. But
I think Anas Sarwar's position is quite difficult now. Right? I mean, one of the things he's pushing is the Scottish Labour, vote for Scottish Labour. We've had 17 years of incompetent SNP government. We need a change. Vote for change, right? It's typical political line, vote for change. And the point I was making to him repeatedly on Twitter is he's Humza Yousaf's speechwriter, because he did the infamous white speech first. Humza wasn't even original. Humza copied it. But it wasn't until Humza copied it that it really hit the headlines, because Humza did it with vindictiveness and with nastiness, whereas Sarwar kind of didn't. It was a bit more bland. Now,
what was the timing between those two speeches, just out of curiosity?
They actually both did it in the same debate in the Parliament. It was a sort of Black Lives Matter, tackling racism in Scotland, but it was the Black Lives Matter period.
Was it back to back in one?
No. I think it was some months apart.
Unless it did it earlier. But the times I heard it, it was like in the same debate. But I think they coordinated with each other because they rattled off a different list. It was as though they said, you take this lot and I'll take this lot. So I really think that they were coordinated in doing that.
I seem to have found an earlier date for
maybe it did run away.
Anas Sarwar doing it first. Now, so he's Humza Yousaf's speechwriter. It makes the change angle a bit difficult to sustain. But all the flack that Humza took about that, and that was his political legacy, the white speech, right? The rivers of white speech was what everyone knew him by, and it's everywhere. Whenever he did anything publicly, if you go onto Twitter, there was multiple people posting this at him. It became his political legacy. It didn't become Sarwar's political legacy yet. But now Humza's gone. Is Anas Sarwar going to have to explain what he meant by that? If he's now trying to be first minister, will someone ask him to actually explain this? Will the SNP, never people to be entirely consistent, start going after him about these anti-Scottish attitudes and start wrapping themselves in the saltire and going after him on this basis? They're well capable of doing it, despite Humza having done the same thing just a wee while ago. I think it puts him in a very difficult position. And he will not stand up and explain himself. He will not backtrack on it. It's a woke religion. You're not allowed to have a step back in the woke religion, because otherwise they will turn on you. Your own side will turn on you. So he's now stuck. He's now got the Rivers of White speech attached to him. And he's the last man standing who thinks that the problem with Scotland is that it's got too many Scots.
Well, it reflects the view of the Labour Party and the SNP. So I don't think their speeches were out of sync with the philosophy of their parties. It was entirely in line. I know I have to say this every time, but just a reminder to the world out there that as far as I'm aware, I think I set the ball rolling on Humza's white speech. I found it and publicised it, and people clipped it from my video, and it got, as I say, the Scottish Parliament debates are not always followed particularly avidly by the alternative media. So I think I did get the ball rolling on that one. Anyway, so that's Humza. Other things from this week.
I would have to say, Richard, there's been more than one thing that I've learned from your research and your output. Right? I mean, you've done a lot, and it's been a great benefit.
Thank you. Right, it's been the same-sex marriage 10th anniversary this week, so there's been a bit of media attention about that. So I wrote a letter. Occasionally, I write a letter to the newspapers. I used to do it a lot. I only do it occasionally, but they tend not to publish things with the family party name in it. But generally, when I do write, it does get published. But I wrote this letter about the anniversary of same-sex marriage. And as I was writing it, I was thinking, they're not going to publish this, because now this is seen as like that. This is just outside the acceptable thing. You can maybe say something about trans, but same-sex marriage, everyone agrees with that now. So I wrote this letter. The BBC had a headline, "How has Scotland changed since same-sex marriage?" So I said, it's eroded the ideal of natural family life. It's encouraged adults to create fatherless and motherless children. It's normalized and endorsed homosexual relationships despite the problems associated with them. It's emboldened the LGBT movement in ever more extreme demands. Emboldened activists to use schools to promote permissive ideology of sex and relationships, and increased fear of expressing views at odds with state-sponsored LGBT philosophy. So we'd repeal it. Yeah, I think now that just doesn't get that those views are not part of respectable mainstream political debate.
Well, I would say that only the Scottish Family Party would put that forward. You would not get that from the Scottish Conservative Party.
No.
And you would not get it from Reform.
No.
They
would use this as an issue to emphasize how nice they are. Okay, we may think the trans stuff's gone a bit too far, but obviously we're good people and we think same-sex marriage is fine. It's the classic cultural conservative, just dragging their heels about the latest thing that comes along. But what they were dragging their heels about 10 years ago is now, oh yes, yeah, well, we're definitely on board for that. Yeah, we're not that old-fashioned or anything. So, and I think that's the problem for social conservatives generally, is they get into the culture of, it's like the latest change. That's the big focus. We've really got to have our attention on the latest. Like at the moment, it's assisted suicide. All the efforts on assisted suicide. But there's still, like in Scotland, 18,000 abortions a year. But well, that happened ages ago. We don't need to worry about that. It's the new thing. It's the latest thing that needs to get all of our attention. But as a family party, it's definitely part of our mission is to say, well, there may be a latest thing, but we need to go back and fix things in the past. If you just work on the latest thing and don't challenge the whole philosophy, then basically you're going to lose every time if you don't strive for the whole.
this is my criticism of the Conservative Party. I was watching. There's a very funny satirist who's pro-independence and is therefore massively unhappy with the SNP. He's called Shawnee Boy, right? And he does lots of videos and he wears wigs, and he's a hoot. And he did one attacking the Conservatives. And he got it completely wrong because he knows his target. When he's going after the SNP, he knows his target. He knows the problems and he's got an understanding of it. He went after the Conservatives with the lazy left-wing view that the Conservatives are evil, right? And the problem with them is they're just evil, right? And this is completely missing the point. It's not right at all, right? The problem with the Conservatives is not that they're evil, it's that they're weak. Right? Evil is not weak. Evil's relentless. Right? They're compromising. Evil's not compromising. It's relentless. So I've tried to raise this with them publicly, and I've never got any engagement. The problem with conservatism is it's unable to reclaim lost ground.
Yeah, I totally agree. What do you think, Phil?
I think the Conservative Party is too broad as well in terms of, that you have got the odd social conservative in there, but they're trying to hold together too many different ideas, and so they end up unable to do anything. And I think that kind of is my perception as the last, government and all their leaders, they all ended up deposing every single leader, and whenever anyone was a leader, they didn't really enjoy much support from the party, and so weren't able to run with their agenda. And they also had the whole of, the civil service to deal with and things like that. So ineffective in government for not having a clear objective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with the same-sex marriage issue, I think the two, Murdo Fraser and Kate Forbes, both said that they didn't agree with same-sex marriage. But Kate Forbes certainly said she wouldn't try and repeal it. I mean, I don't know how that makes sense. I don't know how it makes sense to say you think it was a bad move to introduce it, but you wouldn't remove it. So there's sort of a glimmer of respectability about not agreeing with same-sex marriage, so long as you don't say you'd actually change it, and so long as you don't claim you've actually got any sensible reasons why you disagree. If you just say, oh, I happen to be one of those weird Christians, and we're just a bit odd, and we just happen to not like that sort of thing, but don't worry, we'll never change it. If you say that, okay, it's seen as pretty outrageous, but you can just about cling on by your fingertips in the Scottish government or in the Conservative Party or whatever. But if you actually say, I don't think this was a good move, we would undo it, this is why it's not a good move, then that's just seen as beyond the pale.
I think Kate Forbes' argument is something like this, is that she's able to make something of a marginal difference in the Parliament on some issues, and that she wouldn't be able to get anything through on the issues that she might believe in for lack of support. And well,
I'm sorry. I mean, I'm laughing, but I can't win, therefore I won't try. It is not tremendously inspiring, is it?
So I was listening to a pro-life podcast in the USA, and so there were things that got onto the ballot in at the time of the US election to do with time limits for abortion and things like that. And in some places, the 6-week limits and things like that were removed, and they'd been put in place, I think, but there wasn't enough public support to sustain them. And so as soon as it went out to a kind of referendum at the state level, those things were moved back, and it was quite close to the edge on it. But I think it does underline the importance of that we actually have to influence the nation on lots of these issues. So the idea that you can get there as a leader, and by virtue of maybe perhaps winning on other issues, be able to get this one issue through, even though it doesn't have popular support. I think for us as a party, we have to win popular support for the issues that we're standing on, and for some of them, that means seeing a very big change in the way that the nation thinks, and us arguing, very strongly on these issues and persuasively on these issues. Yeah. So part of me sort of sees something. I can understand the argument that she's making, in that if she somehow unilaterally said, I'm making a stand on this issue, then she can't really do it on the platform that she's standing on. She'd have to stand on a different platform, like our platform, in order to start to argue for those things.
I would say that. I would say to Kate there, the problem with the argument is, with any decision, the first question has got to be, what are the ethical choices? And once you've decided what are the ethical choices, you can then choose between them on the basis of what's going to work. But I think that being in the SNP, government especially, is not an ethical choice, because you're endorsing a whole lot of things that are grave evils. So that's not an ethical choice, because in a political party, even if you're thinking, I'm in it to change it, I'm in it to influence it the better, to the rest of the world, you're saying, support the SNP, vote for the SNP. I commend the SNP to you. And I think that's just immoral. Then the other side of it is, well, it's not Kate Forbes, but other people as well. What tends to happen with politicians on this route is basically they end up lying about what they believe, to put it bluntly. And again, I think that is not, that's wrong. So no matter how effective or ineffective it might be, that's not a valid option, because it involves just doing things that are wrong. Wrong by commending a party that's committing grave evils, and wrong because if you have to say things that you don't actually believe.
I mean, I think from a point of view of passion, it's kind of wrong. In that, if you imagine that you're in a party that's small, but you believe with 90% of what they're standing on, then you can attack that with with your heart. Basically, you can enter into discussions, you can argue from what you believe, and you can be passionate about what you're standing for. But if you're in a party and you actually stand on 10% of what they believe in, and you think you can make a marginal difference somewhere or the other.
I would disagree. I say if you do it, no matter how small the party is, in being a member of that party, unless you're like a secret member, in being a public representative of that party, you're commending that party to other people. And if
would you be doing it wholeheartedly, or would you be? You'd have to fake it on all the issues matter. You're not
I think it doesn't
strongly
matter.
Care about.
If I said I'm a member of Party X, that means I commend to you Party X. I think Party X is the best option. And I think if that party's got sufficiently gravely immoral policies, then I think it's immoral to be commending Party. I just look at the Christmassy background. What I'm saying is not really fitting in with the Christmassy jolly Christmassy background. But that's my take. I think if it's some other sort of organization, then that sort of argument could work. But with a political party, I think it's different, because every political party is putting itself forward to the electorate as an option, asking people to vote for it. So I think it's very difficult, very different in a political party. If you're in it, you're commending it to people.
Yeah, I'm saying that your ability to commend it is somewhat, that you're commending it by just standing for them, but your ability to use the faculties that you've been given to do that, and your ability to argue, is limited by what you're standing on, and so she may say, in some sense, I have more influence by being in the SNP because, they're in government, kind of thing, and I would in the family party.
It's got to be the moral question first.
Yeah. But I'd argue that if she were in the family party, she could fully, stand on what she believes in.
But does she believe it? Right?
Yeah.
I believe so. I believe that when she denies basic Christian moral teaching, I believe she's not telling the truth. I believe that she still believes Orthodox Christian teaching.
During the time she was fighting against Humza for leadership of the party, and I've never seen a happier looking loser, by the way. She was delighted she didn't win During that time, the Christian-hating portion of the SNP, i.e. most of it, decided to go for her.
Yeah.
And for a little while, she actually stood tough, pretty much. And she said, this is what I believe, like it or lump it. And what she got from that was respect. She actually carved out a position where she could speak out. And having done that, she then surrendered it for a seat in the cabinet. She sold out.
Yeah, I believe she's totally sold out. But before she sold out, she'd made statements about where she stood kind of on abortion and things like that, you know.
Not an abortion, I wouldn't say.
In terms of personally, like I wouldn't have an abortion kind of thing. Saying
she's-
that that's her personal moral view.
And she didn't even say that. She didn't even say that.
What did she say on that?
She said about abortion. She said, "Well, I wouldn't personally, but I'll defend the right of any other woman to have an abortion." That was the gist of what she said. So
Yeah.
she definitely didn't make a moral statement.
I think her statement there, like what I'm hearing from it, is that she's saying, like, in a democratic society, she believes almost, as it were, so strongly in democracy that she saw that as almost outweighing the moral issue of where she stood on it. I don't defend it at all, but I thought that was the argument that she was trying to, you know, put forward, maybe not expressed incredibly clearly, but, you know.
Yeah. I mean, if you commit to defending the right to abortion, I think you're planting your flag firmly on the wrong side of the fence.
So I think what she's saying is that it's a byproduct of committing to support democracy. Is that
no? She was saying what she would do.
No, because democracy doesn't preclude. Just because it's a democracy doesn't mean, oh, right, we've had a vote. Someone said they've got 51% of the argument. We're therefore all obligated to agree with that. That's not what democracy is. She always had the position to stand, and she never did. Dr. Lisa Cameron, MP, former MP, did stand on this, right? Very quietly, because she's not a shouty personality. She's quite a gentle human being. She voted against expanding abortion in Northern Ireland, right? On a free vote, right? There's no party whip.
Yeah.
And the response from her own party, from the SNP activists, was get her.
Yeah.
Right?
Get
Get her done, get her deselected, get her gone. Right? Do anything underhand and sleek it to destroy her political career. That's what she faced. That's why she defected to the Conservatives, because there was nowhere else for her to go. Right? She'd been left high and dry. Now, I'm sure, right, that Kate saw that. And she must have made a decision. I'm not going to go down that way.
I think, like, what I'm seeing with Kate, though, like, on gender recognition reform, everyone knew that she stood against it. Not that she stood against it, but she was against it. You know, and in the background, lots of people were saying that was behind the decision to hold the vote when it was held, was the fact that she was on maternity leave. And we see that in her sort of character, was that she.
And how did everyone know? How did everyone know? What you know, a Ouija board? I mean, how did everyone know? Because she's not standing up and saying it. She is not leading. We're about to talk about Scotland, a Christian nation. She's not leading, right, the Christianization of Scotland. She's not leading or championing Christian ideas in Scotland. She's just not. She's silent.
Yeah, that's her strategy, is to not for any good thing for Christian thing, is to be silent. Like on gender recognition reform, you can work out that that's where she stands, and she has, like, a few weeks later, Humza Yousaf resigns, and she's straight into the leadership thing. having, she could have turned up to that vote if she's felt strongly on it, and she chose not to. And I believe that's her strategy on everything moral, regardless of what she believes, is that she thinks it's better to be in the government and make some marginal change on independence or making Scotland a better place to do business than stand on any of these issues and put a neck on the line on them.
The other problem with that, apart from the two I've mentioned already, the other problem is the example it sets. Is you've got like a huge, I'm talking about Christians in particular, a huge swathes of Christians who think Kate Forbes is the role model, and the role model is you don't say anything.
Yeah.
And they think, that's, and then when someone like me does say something, someone says, oh, why can't you just be like Kate and deny what you believe? So I think.
So none of these issues is a hill to die on. Is like, I think Kate's.
I mentioned Shawnee Boy, his satire. So when Humza was being offed from the leadership, right? Shawnee Boy was doing wonderful satires about what was happening inside the SNP, all the spads talking together about what was going on. It was very funny, right? And when they came to the subject of Kate Forbes, they said, well, Kate Forbes, she sold out for very little. He said, yeah, that was nicely done, convictions, who needs those? And I thought that was spot on. That was absolutely valid criticism. She was offered a post and she abandoned every position that she had to abandon to get the post.
I don't think she's taken the flack she deserves for it, though, in the media. In terms of, I was looking at YouGov, like fame factor and approval and things like that, and she's still doing really well. She's doing better than Swinney, better than so many people in government in terms of approval, and so people haven't really, they kind of she got media attention for kind of that little section where she stood up at the beginning, and said, this is what I believe in, and she took a lot of flack for that, and people thought, here's somebody, at least being honest about what they stand for. And people quite like the underdog in things as well. And so she was coming against the SNP establishment and things like that. But I don't think that she's got the media flack for essentially, abandoning her positions.
Because that's a non-story.
Yeah.
A prominent politician says they would have voted against same-sex marriage. That's a headline in the Daily Record.
Yeah.
But that's Patrick Harvey, Savage. A prominent politician says, she defends the right for women to have abortion and she thinks conversion therapy is abhorrent, then that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's a non-story. That's just politician says normal thing. It's not a story. So you end up with, basically, if we talk about Christians in particular, Christians heard the story because it was in the media. Kate Forbes takes flack for saying she would have voted against same-sex marriage. But all the places where she denies traditional Christian teaching.
But she got flack She got flack from the Parliament, I think, for that, and from the SNP for that. But what she got from the UK-wide media is that it in the eyes of the nation, it lifted her up. Yeah. And so if you want to be a national leader, that strategy was actually quite a good one of going up in opinion polls.
I'm not sure. I think that's maybe half of the media, because a significant part of the media were out to get her viciously.
I know, but I think this is the key, right? If you're Christian, right, a significant part of the media will be out to get you. If you then abandon your principles, a la Tim Farron, and even worse, manifestly lie about them, a la Tim Farron, then that half of the media who you're now pandering to, they'll still try and get you, and the other half will join them, right? Yeah. So there's no way out. If you decide to stand up for Christ, there's no way out of that position apart from complete betrayal. You can't kind of massage it, right? You stand on the hill or you don't, and it's a really binary choice. And when she was standing, it did do a lot. It got her a lot of admirers because people say she's just saying what she believes. This is wonderful, right? Because we don't have this. We don't have politicians who are actually honest about what they believe. We've got Humzas and people like that who will believe, I have many beliefs, and if you don't like them, I'll have others. Right? That's what we have to put up with day in, day out. She looked a bit different, and that was enormously attractive simply because it's different, just because it's fresh.
Yeah.
I mean, or goodness be honest, why is Trump so popular? Trump's popular because he's authentic. What he actually thinks, he says.
Yeah.
And it might not be always right, but it's basically honest.
Yeah. It's interesting what we say, because like the Greens and the progressive types, they're still after Kate Forbes, like pro-abortion people. Still, like I say, we're really concerned about Kate Forbes. And they want nothing to go on. I mean, she said she's on their side, but they don't believe her either. I don't believe her, and they don't believe her. It's a strange sort of dynamic. And basically, pro-life people seem to have this myth in their head that Kate Forbes somehow is pro-life, and it's like so. No one believes her. No one believes. So she can say, "I'm for abortion. A woman's got a right to have an abortion." She can say it as passionate as she likes, but pro-life people don't believe her. Pro-abortion people don't believe her. I don't know. It's just a really strange dynamic. Anyway, we need to get on to our main topic.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'll commit my usual crime on the live stream of putting something in the heading, then not getting there.
Not getting there.
Right. So is Scotland a Christian nation? I think we're going to have quite diverse opinions about this. So I can see a few comments coming in as well. I'll try and bring some comments in when we've got going as well. Now, David's written something on this. So, David, so my question to you is, well, two questions. Is Scotland a Christian nation? Yes or no? And what determines whether or not a nation is a Christian nation?
Right. Okay. Let me give you a little bit. I'll keep it short, but a little bit of background. The article's on Substack. It's called "Is Britain a Christian Nation?" So it's a little bit broader than Scotland, because England's a little bit different, as I'm sure you've noticed. And it was inspired by a thing I spotted on YouTube and Twitter. It was Katie Hopkins, right? God bless her. So she'd gone to a pro-Palestinian rally, and she was broadcasting. She was live streaming from this. And a Palestinian activist decided that he would shut her down. So he was basically barking questions so that he would kind of dominate her space and her broadcast. So she took this for a minute or two, and then she turned around and said to him, "If Islam is so great, why are you in my country?" Right? Which is not a bad question, and he said, "This is not a Christian country. This is a secular country. It's not governed by Christian rules." And Kate said, no, this is a Christian country. And I thought, well, that's very interesting, because I don't think that's at all a clear-cut question. And I want to write an article on this. So I started off, and normally I will knock an article out in about 2 days of intense scribbling. This one took me a fortnight, and I kept coming back to it and doing a bit and coming back to it. And it came together. But the reason it took much longer is it's not at all a clear-cut thing. So I looked at it in three different ways, right? I first looked at the history of Britain, in this case, being Christian. I then looked at the rise of secularism, because he was saying it's a secular country. And then I looked at what the Bible actually said about a Christian country, which is, as usual when the word of God is totally different from anything that humanity comes up with. Right? And then I came to some conclusions. So that's the outline of the article. So we can start off with a history bit of that, right? So I looked at it, and I looked at the Celtic Church, the Roman Church, then the Reformation, and you had the Anglican Church in England, you had the Presbyterian Church in Scotland, and then you had all these other non-conformist religions and non-conformist forms of Christianity, all making quite significant contributions into a very vibrant, very diverse pot of ideas that did a lot of good things, right? Ending slavery, for example, and a whole lot of other benefits, that it infused the nation with ideas, and had a huge influence, massive influence. And I didn't even get to some of the more dim and distant bits, like the things I didn't cover, is all the stories, legends, or histories, you choose your term, of Joseph of Arimathea and Christ visiting the southwest of England when Christ was a teenager. And some of those are quite interesting. I didn't go to any of those areas, but just the bit that's established and generally recognized history, you got all of this variety, and it produced what we were as a nation. It had a massive influence. So I concluded, right, having looked at all of this variety, I thought, well, I've got to try and bring it down to what I think Britain being a Christian country, and so insofar as it was, actually meant, right? So I concluded it was the following. So I'll get your comments on this. Right. 1, the belief was God is active in human affairs and his plan for his creation is a work in progress. 2, by God we mean the Christian God of the Bible. 3, human service to God is essential and involves hard work, discipline, and personal excellence. It's manifest as much in individual uprightness and industry as in charity and piousness. 4, extravagance, opulence, and self-indulgence are to be viewed with suspicion and generally shunned. And 5, sacrifice for the family and community is hardwired into the British Christian mindset. That's what I concluded British Christianity was, right? And we'll come to whether it still is. Do you recognize that? Do you agree with it?
Is it Phil? Do you want to go first?
So, like, as it's sort of Christmas, I've been, looking at some of the prophetic stuff, I think, in the Bible. And one of the things that's been striking me around the crucifixion and some of these things is where it talks about rulers. So like in Isaiah 52, it says, speaking of Christians would think this is prophetic of Jesus on the tree. It says on the cross, so he will sprinkle many nations and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand. And Psalm 22 says, therefore, you kings, be wise, be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and destroy you in your way, for his wrath can flare up in the moment. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. And there's this prophetic thing about Jesus that basically, like nations are going to come to the brightness of your dawn and things like that, and that there's going to be kings of the earth that kind of bow down. And so for me, that's kind of what a Christian nation is that it's a nation that's kind of been brought to its knees, and the ruler has kind of said, like, I realize we've gone astray of a nation, and now we're gonna follow God as a nation, and I think that can bring a nation into a kind of different relationship with God. But so it might put some sort of obligation on the descendants or something like that, or if they've pledged to follow God and then they go astray, then there's there might be a judgment that would be different if they had never promised to follow him. And so that would be where my thinking would be in sort of a Christian nation or something like that. But I think that primarily, in the Bible, it says that we are a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Those that are Christians are a nation among the nations. They're aliens. They're strangers in the world. And I'd see that as being a more true position of Christian believers, that they are aliens. They are people that are not of their own nation in some sense.
Are you not having your cake and eating it there?
Well,
so that you want a formally
I
Christian
don't necessarily.
nation
I don't think the formal nation really works that well. You know, I don't think we've seen it work anywhere more than a generation or two that well. You know, a few generations, and the problem is that in the formal and top-down nature of it, that it becomes something of a formal religion, of an imposed religion, and the opposite of that is this is something I'm hearing about Christianity in Iran, is that people are reaching out and preaching the gospel, and they're doing it like it says in Luke 10, where it says, you know, go out with no money, no bag, no belt, no nothing, you know. And as people do that, because they're of no threat, and because they're using such low technology means of going out, there's no way to keep track of where people are going. And they get invited into people's houses, you know, they get shown hospitality because they're vulnerable. And so Jesus said, I send you out like, you know, sheep among wolves, you know. And so that almost that thing of going out in this incredibly vulnerable way is a good way of getting openness from others.
I still reckon you've got a fundamental contradiction to address, and that's it. Is that you're saying you want a nation to be declaring itself Christian?
No,
I Christians to be aliens in it.
I think that will happen. I think that we, you know, like part of the incredible thing of who Jesus is this prophetic message that they're among the people that become Christians are going to be kings. There's going to be kings that bow before the King of Kings. And we kind of saw that with the profession of you know, Queen Elizabeth, which said, like, this is somebody that I bow before as a queen, you know. She wasn't imposing that on other people. And I think that's more of probably a right way of doing things, because it's hard for the king to speak for the nation, you know, on those things. But I think it can happen where there's a humbling event. So if you think of the city of Nineveh, and, you know, Jonah says 40 days and the city will be overturned. And then from the highest to the lowest, everyone repents in sackcloth and ashes. I think at that point, that nation is a nation that's repented and been humbled. But I don't think that will go on past a generation or something like that for those kinds of things.
So you've got a tension between a nation repenting and the people in it repenting.
Yeah,
it's as though you're thinking a nation could have a relationship with God analogous to a person's.
I think there is something geographic in response, you know, to the gospel. And so if you think about people being sent out, you know, that Jesus said of whole towns that for this town it's going to be worse than for Sodom and Gomorrah, because they would have repented if they saw these miracles happening. And then other towns, you know, received the message gladly. And so I think there's something corporate about the way that we respond to things, you know. So like Joshua, he said, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And the jailer and his whole family, you know, came to faith in an evening. And so I think you can see great geographic responses, even at a national level, you know, of repentance and things like that. But it has to be sincere from each person, you know. You know, Zechariah 9, it talks about a whole nation coming to faith in a day.
We can come back to that. David, with your key features, I would say that they are symptoms of a society influenced by Christian culture or Christian faith.
Yes,
would that be?
Yes, that's correct, and that was the point I was making. And I was avoiding specifically, and for a lot of the reasons that Phil's outlined, I was avoiding Katie's position that this is a Christian nation. When she said this, I did a little bit of interaction with people on Twitter, and some people were coming back and say it's Christian nation because of the oath that the king takes. It's a Christian nation because the king's the head of the church. It's English people, obviously. It's a Christian nation because, it's very black and white. It's not Christian because of this, not Christian because of that. In fact, I think it's a much harder question to answer. yes, I was concluding that yes, it was hugely influenced by Christianity, but I manifestly stopped short of saying, and specifically did not say it was a Christian nation. I then went to secularism. So the Muslim chap was saying it's a secular nation. Now I think that's a tactic, because I think Islam has got secularism's number, right? Or it believes it does. I think it finds Christianity quite difficult, but I think secularism it's okay with, because for example, in Iran, there was a lot of communist agitation before the Islamic Revolution. You don't hear much about that now, because they were given a choice. The choice is, do you like breathing? Right, that was the choice. So I think they feel they can cope with secularism as a rival. So anyway, I looked at the rise of secularism. I followed it through deism, and I then followed it through the Enlightenment, and looked at the line through the Enlightenment of geology, of Hutton and Lyell, of Darwin, building up the ideas that ultimately would be used to undermine Christianity. And my conclusion there, that there was two basic ideas that were necessary that gained the public trust, right? And that was an undermining of the confidence in the historical accuracy of the Bible, and an adoption of an epistemology that specifically excludes revelation from the Lord. So that was the mindset. But despite that, I pointed out that actually nothing happened in the common culture. The common culture remained just as Christian as it had been, right? From when Darwin finished his work, right, for essentially another century, right? And I plotted out the membership as a proxy for this, membership of the Church of Scotland, which went up and up and up. In 1880, it hit 25% of the population. And then it stayed at that level until 1960, much later than many people would think. And then it went into decline, and the decline's linear. And you plot it, it hits zero just after 2040. Everyone will have left the Church of Scotland. Right? It's going down like you wouldn't believe. It's a huge falling away. Now, I then couldn't, at the end of that section of the article, I said, right, I've outlined what I think the Christian history of Britain is. So what the belief system that came out of that was. I need to do the same for secularism. And I need to be fair, and I need to be accurate. And although I'm Christian and maybe might be more hostile to some of these ideas, I want to fairly state what they are. So I'll run you through my equivalent bullet point list and tell me whether you think I've been fair and accurate. So I concluded the mainstream view in secularism holds that, 1, an atheist worldview must be employed in the public square, but almost any form of spiritual belief is allowable in private. 2, organized Christianity must be reduced to a form of social work. Anything else or anything more is judgmental and hateful. 3, the state grants rights and entitlements. In return, personal compliance with the state's edicts must be total. 4, self-indulgence is to be celebrated. And 5, victimhood is to be prized, and failure must be rewarded with stolen wealth and influence in the name of equity. What do you think?
I'd say that some of those are practical outworkings, but not what a humanist would say, or a secular humanist would say of those things. So like rewarding failure, like I think there's a lot of meritocracy within humanists and sometimes secularists in terms of, like Darwinian evolution, kind of rewards the fittest kind of thing, and it's more a Marxist kind of thing, which is, the equality in everything. kind of thing. And I think that in some places, even what you do in private, you might not have liberty in some strongly like atheistic cultures and things like that. So that typically
I was talking about secular humanism or secular society in Britain. Right? I wasn't talking about some of the more aggressive types like China.
Yeah, but I think in terms of progress that we'd be on that slope towards the banning of the Bible, the banning of what it teaches, and we can see avenues into that with conversion therapy, with all of these different things. They reach into the home, they reach into, what you teach your children and these kind of things. Face 7-year prison sentences. So in terms of the really bad stuff in there, it might not be strong enough. And in terms of what secularists say they believe, they probably say that's a bit unfair in us rewarding failure kind of stuff.
I think with the secular humanist side, the secularism, the strict definition is leaving, not giving religion any formal role in the state. There's no privileged position for any religious point of view. So from that point of view, I would say I am a secularist. But people who present themselves as secularists, that normally they've got their own set of beliefs, and basically they're basically anti-religious. Someone who says I'm a secularist, generally that means I'm anti-religious, and their political agenda is to contradict whatever Christians are trying to do, that they're on the other side of the fence, pulling in the opposite direction. So generally when secularism is talked about,
I agree with the second half of that.
Okay.
Right. And whatever the Christians are trying to do, they're trying to do the opposite. I agree with that. I don't, and although they say they're anti-religious, I don't actually think they speak the truth, because what they're actually doing is they're trying to impose their worldview, which is all a religion is. It's a way of viewing the world. They're trying to impose their worldview on everybody, and they're trying to stamp out the opposing ideology, which is Christianity.
But I'd say that part's not the secularism part, though. I say secularists normally believe a lot of other things as well. And it's like an almost perfect overlap between people who call themselves secularists and people who've got like progressive values. I mean, but strictly speaking, secularism doesn't need to include that, I don't think.
What I'll say on the Christian nation thing is that every time I hear somebody say that we're a Christian nation, they're about to do something I disagree with, whether it's going into some sort of war, or if it's, once they start making that argument about Christian, often it's a proxy for, I don't like Islam much, or something like that. And if you were to look at the life of the person who's making the argument of we are a Christian nation, you'd find out that person isn't living in line with much that's Christian. And it's more a case of this is a vehicle that can be used to oppose something else. And also on the Christian nation thing, if you say that what makes us a Christian nation is that we've got an established church, the Church of England and all those kind of things, that when you make that argument we're a Christian nation, you're sort of reinforcing almost the right of the Church of England to say what Christianity is, or something like that, So I don't like the argument of, I don't like to use the Christian nation thing much, because I don't think there's many valuable places where it can be used in terms of what are you saying when you say that? It's like you're a Christian nation, therefore even if you don't believe, you've got some sort of obligation to go along with this because you were born in this country, or so I don't find it that helpful. Statistically, the last census for Scotland had 58% of people saying they were Catholic or Christian of some description.
That's outdated, isn't it now? Hasn't there been one since that's shown us a minority?
I think so.
Is it?
Yeah.
Which year is this? Let's see. So, because
quite recently.
This is 2021. don't think we've had one since then, have we?
Right. I'm David seemed quite confident as well. I'm pretty confident there's been one since.
I seem to recall seeing the headlines that Scotland is now a minority Christian nation. I seem to recall that.
Okay.
But that's one of the big problems with the.
This
the
is
Christian
census I'm looking at, which might not be the same as somebody, polling people of lower ages than fill out the census or something like that. So you're of a certain age when you answer the census, and it's done at a household level, isn't it, rather than individual?
I think that illustrates the problem with we're a Christian nation, so you lot should let us make the decisions. The problem with that, what happens when you go to 49%? Then if you're being consistent, you have to say, well, we're not a Christian nation, so you should ignore us. It should be the...
But I don't think you say that on percentage. You say that on some historical thing. Like, we've an established church. We sing "God Save the King, God Save the Queen." These are the things that make us a Christian nation by some sort of constitution.
A total of 51.1% in Scotland's census of 2022 responded no religion.
Yeah, that's what I've got in my head as well.
Up from 36.7% in 2011.
Yeah.
So the figures you quoted were for 2011.
The thing I've got here says, so I've got, this is 2011. Okay, cool.
Yeah. It's I'll go through I think when people say it's a Christian nation, these are the things I thought that people might be meaning. People might be meaning the nations especially chosen by God. I think some American Christians believe that. I think there's the numerical thing. If most people are Christians, then it's a Christian nation. But when people talk about Muslim nations, a lot of people are very careful not to say, for example, Syria is a Muslim nation. They'll say Syria is a Muslim majority nation. And I'm very careful to say that as well. Because if you don't say that, you're implying that, but basically Islam's got a special place in that nation and they're calling the shots. So I think people can mean sometimes that the leaders have declared it in some way officially. We are a Christian nation. As David was saying, back in previous centuries, that did tend to be what happened. It wasn't that the evangelists would go and convert a few peasants. You go to the king, and the king would decide, that sounds good, and that seems like a sensible alliance to get into. We're a Christian nation now. And then you get, then some national leader would say, no, we're not. We're actually a Protestant nation now. And others would say, no, we're not. We're staying Catholic. So it's but again, does it mean much when a leader declares that? I'm not sure it does. And if someone's talking about the culture of a nation, if it's got a Christian culture, then okay, you could describe that. But does that make it a Christian nation? I think the fundamental problem is that the primary definition of Christian, what something makes a Christian, it only applies to an individual person. I would say. Now, some people might disagree with that, but basically it applies to people. So when it gets applied to a nation, it needs an awful lot of explaining to make it clear exactly what that means. And I think what it does mean often is something drastically different than what it means when applied to a person. So I would never base an argument on this is a Christian nation. I would never even begin to use that to exert any liberty. When I'm First Minister of Scotland, I will not be saying, I declare that Scotland is now a Christian nation. I would talk about my faith and policies reflecting Christian values, but I just don't see that I would have a right to do that on behalf of the people of Scotland.
So where I went next in the article was I compared it to the biblical position, right, which is totally unlike either of the two preceding ones. Mm-hmm. So I go through the history of God actually calling out a nation, right, and saying, you guys are going to be a nation of priests. You're going to show forth my praise. And the first thing they do is say, yes, we sign up. And the next thing they do is they make a golden calf and they worship that instead. So it's an extremely complex, disappointing process of improvement and then backsliding, improvement and backsliding. So what the Bible shows is not in any way an easy relationship between the nation, right, including the nation that God shows, and God, right? So and they then said, right, okay, we're having all these problems with God ruling us. So point out that the people conclude, well, it's the system that's to blame because it's not us, right? Lovely. We need a king to rule over us. We don't want God. So they reject God and they want a king. And one of the ways that God eventually resolves that is eventually God is born and into a position as king, right? So eventually he actually resolves that, but he respects their decision. They want a king. He says, king will take all your money and taxes and he'll rob you blind and he'll abuse his power. No, we want a king. So they get a king. And the kings turn out to be the sort of people that we know them to be, politicians and all the rest of it. And so they follow after the king, and then it becomes worse, and the nation splits into two because of taxes. There's a tax revolt. So you have the nation, the Israelites split into the nation of Judah, house of Judah, and house of Israel. And then Israel is conquered and it's taken away up to the north, and they disappear out of biblical history. And I cover that even at the time of Josephus, the historian writing, when Christ had been recently on earth, they were still known to be beyond the Euphrates. So that puts them up around where the Scythians are. Right, so I make that point. So you've got this nation that's in rebellion and has been expelled, and then the Judah, right? They've also had the period in exile in Babylon, and I go through all of this, and I make the point that all the nations that make up Britain, or the people that make up Britain, have in legend or history a link back to the Scythians. So it could well be. I make the case that it is, but it could well be that we are actually the descendants of that backsliding nation who promised to be God's nation and then didn't actually live up to it. And then I point out how individual Christians are grafted into that nation. So if you join the church, if you become a Christian, you are essentially grafted into Israel. You're grafted into that tree. And then I look at what God says when he returns. And when he returns, he'll reunite these two nations, Judah and Israel, and they will serve as priests and prophets, a nation of priests, to help spread God's word across the whole world. So there is, but only after Christ's return, such a thing as a Christian nation, and not really before. Before, what you've got is far more complicated, far dirtier, with a lot of backsliding and a lot of human error throwing in the whole way along the story. So, at the end of this, I bring it together with a quote from the 23rd Psalm, right? I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever, as the end point, but only after Christ returns. And I finish off by re-quoting that in Scots because I love it. And it says, "And at the hither end I will dwell, but and bend with the Lord, aye and for aye." So that gives the biblical view of what the nation is, which is totally unlike either the "we are a Christian nation" team or "we are a secular nation" team. Right? It's not either of those things. It's a messy, complicated story that is only resolved by God, not by us. That's what I conclude, and I hope people watching will look out the article and give it a read and let me know what you think.
Yeah, I'll say that middle sort of way is there's something in that for sure. I would say. What would you think, Phil?
I'm thinking of maybe times where it becomes significant. So I'm thinking of things like for Dunkirk, I think when you had that rescue going out with the boats, there was a day of prayer that was called. It might have been the king was involved in that and various, other people involved or whatever. and that you need some sort of, in order to have something like that, you need some sort of notion that the nation is Christian, to call a nation to prayer or something like that, and so I think there is some
and a tremendous fright and shock to the system and crisis.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they won't get off the bottoms and do it.
Yeah, so I see that as something valuable, and you see that in Israel's history as well. There are times when, the kind of political leadership, along with the spiritual leadership, says, "Hang on now, we just have to pray, or we just have to repent," or something like that. But I think the main job of the believers is to be prophetic into the system, to be prophetic into the nation, and. I'm thinking of maybe there were leaders like Josiah, and Josiah was somebody who was a king, and when a certain prophet was there, I think he did amazingly as a leader and he made good decisions. But as soon as his mentor died, he went straight into kind of setting up idols and going after false gods and all that kind of stuff, and so I think sometimes the role of believers is to be that prophetic voice at whatever level they're at, whether that's to national leaders or schools or whatever.
Yeah. One angle for this was there was a book written 30 years ago by Francis Schaeffer called The Great Evangelical Disaster. And this was written just before he died, and he was sounding the alarm that the world, the society, Western culture was becoming much more evil, was much more depraved, was falling rapidly. And the church, he wasn't talking about Christian nations, he was talking about the church was failing in that it wasn't having the influence, it wasn't sounding the alarm, it wasn't telling the truth, it wasn't being courageous. And this is all the points that he raised. And he highlighted the risks that were associated with that. Now, we've got 30 years of experience beyond that, 40 maybe now, and we've seen how society's changed. And it has undoubtedly changed enormously. A couple of points I make in the articles: when I was small, when I was a wee lad, even maybe when I was a young man, in Scotland, the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland was televised, all of it. Like it was a huge thing. People actually cared what these people thought. And in schools, we had prayers and we had hymns, and we all knew there was a certain shared. It didn't necessarily go terribly deeply, but there was a certain shared knowledge of what Christianity, at least on a surface level, was, and that's kind of been lost. And the influence it had in the nation certainly receded. Now, what has been the effect of that? Well, effect number one has been a huge destruction of the family. This is what you guys are about. This is your USP, right? The family is the foundation on which society is built, and families are being rent apart. Families are failing in this country, and wherever that fails, you have societal decay, you have a great deal of distress, you have failure at an individual level, and it sums up to a national level. And you can see that. I mean, it's most clearly seen, I think, in the black population in America, who escaped slavery, had Jim Crow prejudice and all the rest of it, a huge number of barriers, and just did fabulously well. Every generation was an order of magnitude wealthier, better educated than the previous generation, right up to the mid-60s, when the government said, hang on, lads, we're the government. We're here to help. We'll sort this for you. And they stepped in. And the minute they did, the black family fell apart. And when the black family fell apart, black society fell apart, and crime rates spiraled, drug rates spiraled, and the whole thing went horribly wrong. there's a lesson in there. The same problems can be seen in housing estates in this country, in poor areas, in underclass areas in this country, and it's the same things driving it. And it's a lack of a belief system, a set of standards, a culture, right, that upholds the family, and it's a financial incentive, because there's a lot of financial incentives that are very perverse, being generated by the government, by the politicians, in return for votes that are acting to destroy the family.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've got another hypothetical question about when I'm. Sorry, we won't talk about not hypothetical. When I'm First Minister. So the hypothetical bit. So when I'm First Minister, let's imagine that Scotland is 30% Christian, 30% Muslim, 20% Hindu, and 20% atheist. In other words, most are religious, but a minority are Christian. And then let's say Scotland's independent as well, and let's say Russia's starting to invade. So I want to call the nation to prayer to repel the Russian invasion. Right? How should I do that? Should I put out a general call and say, right, I want you all. I think it'd be really great if you all prayed. So Muslims get along to the mosque, Hindus get along to your temple, Christians get to church. I'll be going to church. I'm a Christian. Come and join me at this event. But let's all pray. Or should I be saying, well, no, actually, the Muslims and Hindus, I don't really believe the same as you. So if we actually want these prayers to do any good, it needs to be my sort of prayers. So nation, I'd like you to all pray, pray to the Christian God for our deliverance. What should I do? What would you recommend?
Like, I could probably more imagine what was the first one is that everyone pray to their own God.
Yeah. But I'm a Christian and
But you're a Christian and you're going to join with a Christian. I'd say I'd go with that combination of the two, probably. Mm-hmm. That this is a situation that we can't solve politically. You know, mm-hmm. that we can see we're going to lose at this point. It's time to, if you have a faith, it's time to pray. I'm going to be praying with this group of people here. You're very welcome to join. But, you know, you're welcome to pray to your own God or whatever, you know. And I think of the situation where Jonah was being thrown overboard, you know, and everyone prayed to his God, you know. You know, he did say, like, you know, no, that the problem's the God that made heaven and earth, he's angry with me, you know, and that's why this has happened. And yeah, so I think you could have something of the attitude of Jonah in that, you know, saying that this is where the real problem is, that maybe we've strayed.
A helpful question can always be, is imagine if, you know, it's those statistics, 30% Christian, 30% Muslim, 20% Hindu, 20% atheist. Let's say it's a Muslim who's the First Minister of the independent Scotland, and this crisis comes. How would we feel if the Muslim said, you know, right, you know, I'm a Muslim, I declare Scotland a Muslim nation, and to get delivered from this, we all need to pray to Allah. Here's the Arabic prayer. You all need to get under it. We would be appalled by that. We'd say, whoa, just forget that. You can't do that. But some Christians would like Christian leaders to behave in the same way. And I would say you can't have it both ways.
That's one of the problems with democracy, is that that's what you can do. You know, that you can win an election with 30% of the votes, or maybe even less if you've got more big parties. You've got Reform, Conservatives, Labour, you know, all of these standing. Then you could potentially see like a Muslim party get in with less than 30% of the votes and declare that the UK is a Muslim nation in some sort of legal capacity, you know.
I think what I'm going to do, actually, there's lots of comments I want to get to, and I think if we try and get to them, talking about them all together, we won't get anywhere, because we'll be chipping in. So I'll wind up our discussion with the three of us. Then what I'll do, I'll stay on for a while and just go through some of the questions, and just respond to some of those. And I think that would be a good way to go. So have you got any final words of wisdom for us, David or Phil? I think that was very interesting discussion around a complicated. It's a complicated issue that I think a lot of people think is simple. And that's what I took from your article, I think, Dave.
My final 2 cents worth is probably like, the commission that Jesus gave the disciples, which was like, go and make disciples of all nations and teach them to obey everything that I've commanded. And that discipleship relationship is not one of force, but one of, somebody who's being discipled is somebody who's willingly coming to learn and, is not being compelled to do anything, but has decided like this is something I want to follow, and you've got people helping that. And I just believe that as people are in those relationships, that maybe it will start in a family, but if you're faithful with your family, then you'll see it happening in the community, and if you're faithful in the community, you'll see it happening at bigger and bigger levels. And God will raise up those who are faithful with small things and put them in charge of greater things. And so I think there's a lot that starts at the grassroots. My motivation to get involved in politics was the legalizing of things that were needed to bring the gospel, and to preach as a Christian, the thing that you can be thrown in jail for elements of the gospel which have now become, things that it would be illegal to teach and things like that, So it's kind of wanting to keep that door open so that grassroots movement is free to run, is my thought.
Okay, yeah, thank you. David, any?
Well, Christianity is not compatible with the state. The state's about a territorial monopoly on force and violence, and Christianity, as Phil said, is about a voluntary decision, a decision willingly made by each individual Christian. And what the Bible shows is that at the end of the day, there will be a Christian nation. There will be a nation honoring and serving God, but only after Christ returns, and only after a great deal of turmoil and that nation having realized how wrong it's been and repented of all its evil. So that's what it takes to make a Christian nation, nothing short of the second coming. So don't look for any contemporary nation to be an exemplar of Christianity, but rather stand for the truth and stand with Christ and get ready for some trouble, I think, is my message.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you both for the discussion. It's been fascinating, and for having me on tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on. My final, what you were saying there, David, and Phil, actually, that's entirely in line with the philosophy of the Family Party. The Scottish, we're not a Christian party, because we're not saying we want Christians in charge, because that's what really would make the difference. Our line is, we've got the best ideas for making the country run better, and for people to flourish in it and be protected, etc. So that's what we say. We're important. Speaking personally, sometimes we talk about the Scottish Family Party being like an import business from my point of view. Export business. We're exporting Christian values, principles, teaching. We're exporting it into the political realm, where it can do a lot of good, can be very valuable. So it's about that rather than, we're going to make it declare it a Christian nation or whatever, because as I say, I'm not sure what that means. So I think we've ended up on the same page there, very definitely. So, right, thanks very much. Audience, do stay around. I'll have a look through a few comments. There are a lot of them, and it's remiss to not go through some of them. So I'll hang around and I'll go through. But thanks, David. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
And hopefully you'll be back soon. I say lots of comments. Let's have a look. Christian church in North Korea. Yeah, the church in North Korea is persecuted appallingly. Stories do come out. Sometimes Christians from North Korea escape into China. I heard this a while ago. They escape into China to escape persecution. And China just hands them back again. Just sends them back again. So that's pretty grim. Right, let's see whatever we've got. Rulers commanded to uphold the good. That includes the church. Yes, rulers should certainly uphold the good. I think in terms of the the state and the church. The state should not see its job, obviously, to restrict or hinder the church, and even to be like, for example, if you look at charity law at the moment. Charity law, in some ways, is beneficial to the church, isn't it? Because the church can be a charity, and there's all sorts of financial benefits from that. The government tries to use it to exert leverage on the church, which is not good. But there are some ways in which the state is positive towards the church. I mean, another example in Scotland would be Catholic schools. The state funds Catholic schools. I think in lots of ways they sort of would rather they didn't have to, and they don't really like it, but they haven't really got the nerve to do anything else at the moment. So there are these ways where the state is positive and supportive towards the church. But I think that's as far as it could go. It should be supportive and enabling, facilitating, or whatever. I mean, in Scotland, at the start of each parliamentary term, there's a service in St Giles Cathedral, which would be notionally Christian, vaguely Christian, probably not really. But I would say the idea of having a service, if your country is majority Christian, then have a service in your cathedral. Maybe but in that situation, if this is the official opening event of your parliament, then it's got to bear in mind that a lot of the people are not Christians. A lot of them might have other religions. So it needs to bear that in mind. But then at other times, I think the politicians, the leaders can speak very freely about their faith. Right, let's have a look what else we've got. Right, I picked Russia as an example of a potential invader because I think it's probably the most likely one from there's not much choice for that. I don't think Scotland would really be under threat from invasion. Right, let's have a look. Right, there's someone who's trying to make everything into an argument about sort of Catholic and Protestant. I'm not really interested in that here tonight. Right, glad you enjoyed it. Right, David's article, I think, if you go find Northern Exposure online, I think you'll probably find it out. Or if you want to drop me an email, I could send you a link. Yeah, that's the thing with the Christian nation, isn't it? It's like as soon as, with the family party, again, another reason why we're not called a Christian party is that when we get elected and we're running the country, if we make a mess of it, which obviously wouldn't happen, but if we did, for some reason, then people would look at that and think, oh, we tried the Christian way. That was rubbish. That didn't work out well at all. So Christianity, that mustn't be much good. I don't want Christianity. I don't want God judging by the performance of the Scottish Family Party. And it's the same for a nation as well. If you declare it's a Christian nation, then other nations are going to look at that. And if you do something wrong, then they're going to look at that and they're going to regard your behavior as a reflection of Christianity. So, yeah, I think it's not the sin that should take on in that way, take on lightly. It's quite a responsibility. Right. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Christianity underpins our traditional values. I think a lot of people don't know it. I think what happens in a society is you might have a generation or generations where most people are Christians. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but a substantial proportion of people are Christians. And then there's a cultural expectation of people going to church. So almost everyone's got an awareness and understanding of Christianity, and they're influenced by the culture of it. I read someone say once, it was a long time ago, they said if you get about 10% of people who are really Christians in a society, then that makes a real difference to the whole culture of the society. So you have that situation, but then if the proportion of people who do genuinely have Christian faith, if that proportion goes down, then the whole thing sort of gets hollowed out. And it can run on its momentum then. People will hold traditional values. Like we've probably got a few generations, it's more or less gone now, but in the past, there'll be generations that know, obviously, you don't live together before you get married. I mean, everyone knows that. You just don't do that. That's just wrong. That's a bit scandalous. A lot of the people wouldn't be able to explain why, but everyone just knew. And once people don't understand why, then that's vulnerable to fade away. So part of our role as a family party, I think, is explaining why some of these values actually make sense. They're not just things that are meaningless or arbitrary. They do actually make sense. I think it was Roger Scruton said the job of social conservatives is to give people reasons for what they already believe. Now, in terms of our issues, that's probably out of date. I mean, people who are naturally got socially conservative values, we're talking about really people in their 80s now. So there are not many people who've got conservative values because it's just what they grew up with. That's just what everyone believed. Almost everyone in a society now, they're not the natural set of values for them to adopt. That's a comment from 1004. I may well have been wrong, but I'm not sure what I was saying at the time. Maybe you could explain. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because although Muslim majority countries do declare themselves officially as Muslim nations, I mean, Stan, does it imply Muslim nation? I seem to remember that it does. Now, if you imagine that, say, for example, you're a Christian living in a Muslim majority nation, would you be happy for the leaders to be declaring this to be a Muslim nation? I mean, I'd be thinking, no, don't really like that. Can we not be a secular nation? Can we not just have the country run as well as possible? Do you really need to declare that it's Islam that's at the top of the tree? That's always a really important question. What would you think if the boot was on the other foot, basically? Because for many centuries in Britain and Europe and in other parts of the world now, the assumption is that if your bunch can get power, then you use that to give the people in the other groups a hard time and to suppress them and try and sort them out and just pressurize them into coming and agreeing with your beliefs. That was just taken for granted in Britain until not too many hundreds of years ago, and in some parts of the world it's taken for granted now. But just that way of thinking is not right. It's special pleading if you say, oh, well, if someone can get to power and declare it a Christian country and really pressurize people to be Christians and give people of other religions, make things a bit uncomfortable for them, try and suppress that a bit. If that's the way you're thinking, then if you think, oh, well, Muslims shouldn't do that. No, if Muslims are in charge of a country, no, they need to respect the rights of Christians. You can't have it both ways. You can't have your cake and eat it. Eileen, I think if I bring your comment in, it'll obliterate me because it's quite a big comment. But it is interesting with secularists that there usually is this other agenda that goes along with it. I'm sometimes not sure what's the chicken and what's the egg. Is it that people are a bit anti-religious, therefore they oppose whatever religious people are trying to do? Or is it people have got values that are at odds with, say, Christian values, therefore they join the secularist cause as a way of undermining Christian values? I'm not sure which way around that happens. If you went back, say, 15 years, secularists were, and atheists, humanists, whatever, they were quite a significant force in national debate. The newspapers would be full of it, and you quite often have a spokesperson from the secular society or humanists or whatever. It was like the Richard Dawkins New Atheist era. They were quite a significant force, but it's really faded away, I would say. They've shot their bolt, and it ultimately didn't hit home. Well, like Richard Dawkins was given he was given his own TV show on the BBC. He was so anti-Christian, they gave him his own TV show on the BBC. But did it work in the end? I feel no. I feel it didn't. There's a lot of interest in it, but I think basically the attack didn't work. I think there's more people now who are thinking that the decay of Christian values or Christian faith, however they might put it, that's part of the problem that we're in. So I think there's been a big shift in public perception. I think there are far fewer people now who are thinking if we could just get rid of this Christian tradition, then we could get this country sorted out. I think the SNP is founded on that philosophy. The Labour Party is. But in the general public, I think it's receded significantly, that point of view, I would say. when people talk about progressivism, what do they think they're progressing from? They're progressing from generally like the 1950s and whatever was before then. So progress started with the departure from traditional Christian values, and the further you progress away from them, the better you're doing. That's a pretty strong underlying philosophy in Scotland and under some of the political parties, I would say. Right, let's just look for another comment or two. Yeah, I think that's a massive problem. I always say whenever I'm watching, well, I don't watch television, but when I used to watch television, if ever the clip went to someone with a dog collar sitting in a pew in front of a stained glass window, my heart would sink. And because I would just know this person's about to say something that's totally the opposite of Christian teaching. Because that's what they want to do. That's what the media want to do. They want to really show the most Christian image they can. You know, man in dog collar in pew in front of stained glass window, name comes up, Reverend so-and-so. What do you think? And then he's going to say something totally opposed to Christian teaching. And I think that's very confusing for people. I heard someone say once they were, I think they were a civil servant actually, working for the Scottish government. And they said an issue would come up and they would invite consultation responses. They would invite comments. You know, they knew Christians had strong opinions, so they'd invite comments from Christians. And then they'd get them all in front of them and say, okay, right, so what can we conclude? What do Christians have to say about this? And what they conclude every time is Christians are all over the place. Half of them think this and half of them think that. So what do we do with that? Well, let's just forget the lot. It's all cancelled each other out. And that's exactly what happens, because in Scotland in particular, you know, the Church of Scotland, that's seen as, you know, that's the big heavyweight. That counts for, you know, big proportion of Christian view. What have they got to say? Well, sadly, more often than not, what the Church of Scotland's got to say is the opposite of traditional Christian teaching. So even when the civil servants, the government, even when they're sincerely asking Christians in Scotland in general, churches in Scotland in general, what their view is, they don't learn anything, because they just hear people contradicting each other. And yeah, I could talk about that more, but it's a very serious problem, and it's a very grave responsibility and accountability on churches and church leaders that are doing that. Right, let's find another couple. That's interesting. Many Christians fled the country when the king declared himself head of the church. So I guess we're talking back in the 17th century sometime. Yeah, again, that was the time when I talked about the sort of culture when it was assumed. I mean, in Britain, it was just 17th century, just total chaos. Where you got Catholics, Episcopalians, the Covenanters, Presbyterians, all sorts of other groups as well. And the general assumption was that it's a power struggle. And if you can get the power, then you can use that to give the others a hard time and give your own people a bit of special treatment and try and pressurize people into your camp. That was just taken for granted. That's what you did. So the power struggle was who's going to have the levers of power. Is it going to be the Presbyterians? Is it going to be the Catholics? Is it going to be the Episcopalians? Or the king in charge of the church, whatever. So that's what people would fight over. And I said that's the problem. So if you've got that situation in society where there are massive religious disagreements, I think the best way is that your leader, you know, if he happens, for example, to be a Catholic, then the ideal person in that situation would say, okay, fine, I'm the leader of the country, but I'm the leader for the whole country. I'm not going to try and put pressure on people or restrict people who are not Catholics. You know, everyone's welcome, everyone's equal. I'm a Catholic, this is what I think, but, you know, let's get on with running the country or fighting the French or whatever they were doing at the time. That would be the approach I would take. Right, national establishment of Christianity is in biblical prophecy, Old and New Testaments. Rulers to serve Christ is happening in Christendom. Presently, there is a national apostasy. Yeah, I think the nation of Israel, obviously, I think is a special case. So I would discount that. Are there other instances in the Bible where it seems to imply that the decisions of a leader or the head of a family determines the faith position before God of the wider group. There are passages that indicate that. I find them quite difficult to understand, to be honest. Maybe someone like Catholic or Orthodox might find those a bit easier to understand, but even there, I think this is tricky in a sense. So would it be significant? I mean, again, let's say, when I'm First Minister of Scotland, if we say stopped abortion, if I were to say, I'm going to pray on behalf of this nation for forgiveness for what's been done over the last 50 years or whatever, would it be appropriate to do that? I think I would. Yeah, that's something I think I would do, but I would do it in a way that's not assuming everyone's a Christian. They were saying, I'm a Christian, I'm the leader of the nation, this is what I feel I ought to do. Yeah, maybe that's in tension with some things I said earlier on. It's tricky. Scotland was built on Christianity. The moral foundation has been destroyed by left-wing ideology. Yes, yeah, absolutely. How will that change? I think it will change by the standard Christian response will be, it will change when more people become Christians. I actually think it's changing. Sometimes people's values are changing before they become Christians. They're beginning to see that the moral foundation has been eroded. We need to restore the moral foundation. And there's people who are even explicit, we need to restore the Christian moral foundation. But they haven't actually become a Christian. I think that there's a lot of people in that situation, and I hope it's a journey towards the faith as well. Right, Mary, that's a good way of doing it. I talked about the import and export idea, didn't I? So when it comes to politics, I think as a Christian, I want to take my values, principles, and export them into politics. Or what we don't want to do is import politics into the church, or political values into the church. That's very damaging, and that's happening on a very wide scale in Britain. Generally with left-wing politics, and America is generally right-wing politics, but it's equally wrong in either place. Right, let's just finish very soon. Got a lot of comments. Right, good question. How about a reply to the Scottish Government's consultation on religious observance in schools? I haven't yet, but there's a little while. Generally speaking, the only reason I fill in consultations is because it helps me to think it through, and I publish it for our supporters to read. The ultimate goal of a consultation, as far as I'm concerned, is you get invited to the committee. Is that going to happen with me? Even if I wrote the most brilliant, longest, most detailed, most well thought out response to a consultation, are they going to invite me to that committee room in the Parliament to discuss it with them? No, absolutely no way, because they would see that as being like giving attention, giving publicity to the family party. So will I fill it in? Possibly, I don't know. I'll explain what it's all about, though. It is interesting. As far as I can tell, I've only looked at it briefly, but as far as I can tell, what it's saying is it's trying to push the balance towards kids can decide for themselves whether they go to religious, moral, and philosophical studies lessons. So if one way this could work, for example, let's say a family say they don't want their child to go to the religious, moral, philosophical, or MPS lessons, then they could withdraw them from that. The same as they can with sex education or religious observance. But the principle the Scottish Government is pushing is always children's rights. So the parents might not want them to go. But what if the children want to overrule the parents? And as far as the Scottish Government is concerned, they think, well, yeah, obviously that's a step forward. Of course, children need to be able to overrule their parents. But this is children's rights. The United Nations says that. That's what's most important. No, everything we do is centered on human rights. So it's basically heading towards the point where children can decide. So children will be able to, well, more so than at the moment, overrule their parents when parents want to withdraw them. But it will also mean the children can withdraw themselves as well. So that will be very interesting, won't it? Now, I think RMPS should be a subject where everybody has to go. Simple as that, because it's not like religious teaching in any particular. it's learning about religion, it's learning about philosophy, it's learning about moral arguments. So I don't think there should be any special provision. I don't think there should be any need for anyone to want to withdraw their child from that. But what they're opening the door to is for the child to be able to withdraw themselves. So for schools, teaching RMPS is going to become a nightmare, because someone has to say, sir, I've decided, well, not sir, because it's a Scottish school, hey, mate, Ted, Baldy, I don't want to be in this lesson. Children's rights and something. So, yeah, I don't want to do it. Okay, then you go along and play on your phone in the library or something. So, I mean, is it going to end up in that sort of situation? Seems like it is. Yeah, so basically, to sum up, so the consultation is about giving children more choice about whether they not want to go to these lessons or not, which is just the recipe for chaos. But the government's obsessed. Human rights are the religion substitute of the Scottish government. So, yeah, watch this space. Let's see how it all works out. Right, we're more or less back to the beginning. So I will leave it there for this evening. In fact, we'll leave it there for this year. This is the last live stream of the year. We'll be back early in January, so do join in. So we've got a visitor for the first one in January. I'll tell you the topic. We're going to talk about the person got in touch with me, and they said they like everything about the family party. They listen to the live stream, they enjoy it. But the one point he made in particular was that I will often talk about, there's naughty kids, and they need bringing into line. And the approach of the Scottish government, it fails in this regard. It's indulgent, doesn't hold kids accountable, so they behave really badly. And the point that he made was a very valid point, is that there are young people who do have genuine problems that mean that process just ain't going to happen. It's not just a matter of, if you can get the right sort of discipline and support or whatever, then the kids will behave themselves. So yeah, in my teaching career, I've come across several boys like that. It was a boys' school where just nothing we were going to do was going to address an issue, so we had to say goodbye to them. But that's at the extreme end. But in other forms of behaviour as well, there might be some things that a pupil does that they genuinely can't help, and that's very difficult, particularly as a class teacher, because if someone's doing something and you're just sort of having to accept it, it makes it quite difficult to enforce the standard with the rest of the class. But it was a very, very valid point that he brought up. So we're going to discuss that in the first one in the new year. So I think I'll probably make a video or two before the week's out as well. There are a few topics waiting for a video to be made. So yeah, have a good Christmas and see you in the new year. Oh, one last thing to mention. We raised all the money for our 18,000 fairy lights, by the way. So I'm in the process of gathering those together, and we'll be out and about with those. I think they'll make quite an impression. So, right. So yeah, happy Christmas, and see you in the new year. Good night.